In this week's episode, I'll be following up on the top 10 moments that shaped me as a writer. I'll be talking about my top 5. I'm Michael Laron, and this is the Writer's Journey podcast, where you get a window into the life of a working science fiction and fantasy author. I'm on a mission to go from nobody to bestseller, and I'm documenting every step of the way. Tune in every week as I share my progress and discover what inspires my books and how I write them. You can find the show notes for today's episode at michaellaron.com/podcast. This week, I'm taking you behind the scenes of my writing process. Hello and welcome to episode 20 of the podcast. I'm 20 episodes in and the podcast doesn't feel new to me anymore. Thanks to everyone that has tuned in so far, and here's to a bright future. In episode 11, I counted down the first half of the top 10 moments that shaped me as a writer. If you haven't heard that episode, you can find it at michaellaron.com/episode 11. Anyway, the first round was finding my biological father, taking WMG workshops with Dean Wesley Smith, reading the works of Swami Vivekananda and Ray Bradbury, and learning how to speak Spanish. Those experiences developed me as a writer in important ways, and if you read my work, their influence on me is obvious. So let's jump into my top 5 moments, shall we? Number 5 is writing music. As you guys know, I started my creative career as a musician. I was writing songs in high school and very active in band. I'd come home from school, do my homework, practice my saxophone, and then I'd write music. I had a computer program that allowed me to capture my ideas, and it would play them back for me on it's like MIDI notation software. And I would try to recreate my favorite songs in this app, and I started with television themes. I collected TV themes because they were so fun to play and listen to. Because smartphones didn't exist, I carried a CD around of my favorite TV themes. Matlock, The Odd Couple, Knight Rider, Alf, I Love Lucy, Moonlighting, The Cosby Show, The Greatest American Hero, all great music, right? Anyway, writing music was important in my development as a writer, and my love of TV themes brings me to number 4, which is my friendship with my friend Will. When I was collecting TV themes and writing music, it turns out that he was doing the exact same things as me, learning how to play music and how to write it as well. I don't remember how we even met, but we were in marching band together and we ended up talking about TV themes somehow, and I shared my CD with him. 13 years later, we're best friends. Music-wise and life-wise, we're on the same wavelength. I can remember hours and hours spent at both our houses writing songs. Now, I'm a creative, but he's even more of a creative than me. I remember learning so much watching him play music, explore his guitar and his piano as we figured out chord changes. And he's got this incredible eye and ear, and working with him taught me how to sharpen my eyes and ears as well. Will is a musician these days, so he stayed on the music route, but we're still best friends all these years later. Number 3 is The Creative Pen by Joanna Penn. I'll talk more about the circumstances that led me to finding Joanna in my number 1 item, but listening to Joanna's podcast and reading her blogs inspired me to be an indie author. If I hadn't done that, I would probably still be submitting my work to publishers, waiting on them to accept me. Number 2 is studying abroad. In college, I had the opportunity to study abroad in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Panama. I traveled with a student group for 3 weeks, and at the end of that, I broke off from them and stayed behind, traveling by myself to Nicaragua instead. I have no idea why I decided to stay there on my own. Looking back on it, man, was it ballsy. But man, did it teach me a lot about myself. I was in a foreign country where I barely spoke the language, had no guide or help, and I had to learn how to live by myself in Managua, Nicaragua for 2 weeks. I went to many interesting places, ate so much interesting food, but there's one experience that I'll never forget. I had visited an ATM to get out some cash, and I only had one bank card because it had all my money on it. I accidentally dropped my wallet while I was putting the cash in it, and it took me a while to gather all my belongings. When I looked up at the ATM, it beeped at me and told me that it had retained my card. I had to go into the bank to claim it. Now, in the United States, that wouldn't normally be a big deal, but in a place like Nicaragua, banks aren't always safe. In fact, my host father recommended that I avoid them unless absolutely necessary. After all, guards with machine guns stood outside the front entrances. I was terrified. I had no money, and no money in a foreign country is nothing but trouble. I could have gone into the bank and explained what happened. Instead, I knew a place up the road whose clerk would let me use the phone to call my host parents. Surely they would know what to do. So I started up the road, traffic is speeding by me as I'm trying not to freak out, and I pulled out my wallet to get my host parents' phone number, and what's in my wallet? My bank card. Seriously, my bank card was in my wallet, the exact same one that the ATM ate. I know what I saw. The ATM ate the card, yet here it was in my wallet. That incident gave me a lot of faith, and it was definitely a higher power protecting me. I'll never forget that. Anyway, here we are at my number one item. Number one is a near-death experience. In 2012, after a nice dinner with my wife, I fell ill with what I thought was food poisoning. I ended up in the hospital for a month. That experience taught me a lot about life, and it confirmed that I needed to stop wasting it. When I got home from the hospital, I became a writer for real. I talk more about this experience in my book, Be a Writing Machine, but this experience was integral to me becoming a writer, and it's woven into the fabric of who I am. It's why I always mention it on my podcast interviews. It was the number one moment that shaped me as a writer. Thanks for joining me this week. If you enjoyed the show, here are a couple ways to help a brother out. If you're listening to this on Anchor, favorite the show. If you're listening to this on a podcast app, do me a favor and write me a review and share it with your friends. You can, of course, visit my website and learn more about my work at michaellaron.com. If you have a question, send me a voice message on Anchor and you just might hear it on the show. Next week, I'll be giving an update on what I'm currently working on, and I'll be answering your questions. Until then, I leave you with a quote. Only I can change my life. No one can do it for me. Carol Burnett.